Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. If you're like most Americans, you spend a significant amount of your time working. In fact, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work in America? On this podcast, the Work for Change team will. Work for Change, LLC is a team of social scientists, thought leaders, and digital storytellers who dig into the critical issues affecting American workers and workplaces today. Our podcast is co-hosted by Dr. Kendra Jason and myself, Dr. Kris Maycumber. We'll also bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. We are so excited for you to join us as we lead the efforts to humanize the workplace by building dignity and equity into jobs, work, and organizations. Please subscribe to the podcast and share us with your friends and family. You can learn more about Work for Change at workforchangellc.com. Welcome to episode 2 of Jobs and Work. This episode is in the news. We're going to be talking about the employers who offer incentives to get employees vaccinated. I'm your co-host, Kris Maycumber.
And I am Kendra Jason.
And we're going to jump right in today. So just for those who might not be familiar with what's going on, CNN just released a report outlining how there are several employers like Instacart, Dollar General, Aldi, and Trader Joe's who are offering their hourly workers vaccine incentives, offering to give them either a stipend or offer to pay them 2 hours of pay so that they don't not get vaccinated because they would miss out on their hourly wage. So we're going to talk a little bit about the sort of implications of that and apply our work lens to this in the news topic of the week. And I think, Kendra, I just wanted to start off with a general question.
Okay.
I think what this sort of move, this action speaks to is this larger question is what is the responsibility of employers to be, what is the responsibility of employers to be invested in the health and wellness of their workers outside of them at work? So we have labor laws, we have safety laws, we have protections for workers when they're in the domain and physical space of work. Mm-hmm. This move kind of takes that and says, well, what is the responsibility? What should the responsibility be of employers to be invested in the wellness and care of their workers outside of that context? So what do you think about that sort of broader framing?
Oh, that's a big question. I have a lot of thoughts. So one is that the COVID vaccination is a complicated topic. It's complicated and it's dynamic, and it's really hard to address it or think about it in the straight and narrow without really kind of stepping back and understanding, yes, it is about health and wellness. It is about public health. The vaccination is, of course, designed for the good of public health. But there are a lot of cultural implications as well, and a lot of things to think about with different types of workers and how they respond to the COVID vaccination, especially this early. And so I do think it's a good sign that these major companies are investing in their workers by offering the stipend and the hourly wages. But I just can't help but think about the complications behind that as well. So for instance, so if you have a worker who does not want to take the vaccination or cannot take the vaccination for medical reasons, is this a form of coercion? Do they feel like it may be some type of repercussions? Will they lose hours because they're not taking advantage of this health and wellness incentive offered by their employer? So that's the first thing that I'm thinking about when you ask this question about the responsibility of corporations investing in their workers. This is not a wellness program. This is not let's put on a pedometer and see how many how many steps we get type of incentive. So
yeah. Well, and right, like you're talking about the unintended consequences of it, right? It's
Mhm.
they're incentivizing people, but is there going to be some kind of backlash? Is it an incentive slash expectation? Because I think those are two different things. Like we're going to incentivize you, but we're also expecting you to take advantage of this incentive,
Yes.
which then has fallout for how people, react if they don't do it. And for various reasons are people who are resistant to the vaccine. Yeah, so I think part of this too is thinking about like worker rights. I think maybe this might bleed into that conversation at some point, just in general about vaccines. Like, what are the rights of workers to say no and to be protected from that?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so one obvious, question that this article, this news release presents is right now, this is presented as an incentive, right? And there's a slippery slope between incentive and mandatory
Mhm.
vaccinations, right? And so when you're talking about workers' rights and mandatory vaccination, when there are so many, there are a lot of unanswered questions about the vaccination. It's a new version of a vaccination just released. And then, of course, I know that the question of mandatory vaccinations will not come up until there is enough supply for your everyday American. But it just lends that question of, again, is this leading into mandatory vaccinations, which again is a question of worker rights, and again takes a responsible corporate entity, I think, would think not just about the common good, but about cultural competence and the different perspectives and beliefs and values of different types of workers.
Mhm. Right. And it's interesting that we're seeing this relegated to, like, from what we know right now, grocery stores, right?
Mhm.
Instacart, Dollar General, which is not necessarily a grocery store, but they do sell groceries,
Mhm.
Aldi, Trader Joe's. So it will be, I'm curious to see who is going to follow suit with that. If there is going to be like a wider swath of employment sectors who are going to offer incentives, or if it's going to kind of stay in this little orbit of the grocery. And the article also talked about essential workers with retail as well.
Mhm.
So thinking about who we consider the essential workers. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how wide this move goes.
Yeah, so the article did note, it said that 72% of current and recent CEOs of major companies signaled a willingness to vaccine mandates. And so, this is just one survey, this is one poll that was provided by the Yale Chief Executive Leadership Institute. But it does give us some lenses into, once again, to be frank, these are major, rich, profitable leadership CEOs of basically Fortune 500 companies mandating health on their hourly workers, which are essentially, you can replace hourly workers with low wage workers. These are your workers who are making $7.25 an hour. These are your low wage workers who are in poverty, who are the working poor.
Mhm.
And so, you do have that dynamic where you have, powerful leadership making decisions on behalf of a much less powerful group with much less resources. And so, that's also something, to consider.
Right. And, it also makes me think about what kind of ways were they invested in the health and wellness of their employees before
Yeah.
COVID?
Yep.
Is this just like this flashpoint, and how will they maintain their investment in the health and wellness of their employees after COVID or after this vaccine rollout, happens? And so I guess, because what that means is, like, are you really invested in the common good of the health of your workers, or is this about making sure you don't lose your workforce? Like, and I think that's to be seen
Mhm.
based on what they've done before. It's why history matters. Like, well, how have you treated your workers? How have you been invested in their health and wellness before 2020, and how will you after this sort of fades into the future? So
Yeah.
I
You
think
know,
that's to be seen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about any of these companies, Aldi, Trader Joe, Instacart, or Dollar General, but they are not like known as pillars of, of treating their workers, great. I mean, they're hourly workers. They're good. They're good. They're companies. They're low wage jobs, right? And so you ask a really good question, because it lends into another question about trust, right? And so there's a lot of conspiracy theories, if you will, or misinformation, however you want to say it, and new information surrounding the COVID vaccination. One thing that we do know is that, we do have a good response of people wanting to take the vaccination, but not the response that the government had hoped. A lot of people are very, very, very reluctant. And so it lends the question of, are these companies getting incentives from the pharmaceutical companies? Are they getting incentives from the government? And so, not to say that anything is necessarily wrong with, companies getting incentives, but it also lends into, people questioning the motives behind these companies who, like you said before, these are companies of low wage workers. Were they so fantastic before? Did they care so much about their workers before, where all of a sudden, they're offering, I mean, and the incentives are okay. It's like a $25 stipend, 2 hours of work or 4 hours of work. It typically takes 2 to 4 hours to get the vaccination. So it's a trade-off. It's not like you're getting paid for getting the vaccination. You're just not losing hours, or you're not losing wages in a sense. And so it just lends a lot of questions that remain to be answered, or that the general public and these workers are just going to be curious about.
Right. Yeah, and right. It's not like, sort of the incentive is trying to remove the barrier to go, but they're not actually, there's not like a reward structure. It's kind of like when I incentivize my students to go vote. I'll just say, we won't hold class today, but I don't give them extra points if they go vote. I just say, I'm going to remove the barrier to voting, but I'm not going to actually reward you for doing it. So yeah, I think this is going to be the beginning of a longer trend of this, and I'm interested to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, and so, one thing that I'm thinking about with, the COVID vaccination and, this push for vaccinations, I really think a bigger issue is the stimulus relief package. However, people are reluctant, and some people are eager to get the vaccination. That's one thing, but almost everyone, most Americans really need these relief packages. We have, 43 million Americans living in poverty. Almost, all Americans have been impacted in some way. And of course, like, everyone doesn't need $600 or $1,200 or whatever the next, because, they're okay. But there are too many working Americans who are on the fringes, who are facing evictions, who are, who cannot provide food or internet for their families so their children can go to school. And so I think all of these things need to, to work together. So if these companies want to offer, incentives when it comes to the vaccinations, as you posed the question before, well, what else have they been doing? Can they take a step further and work with their local cable companies to offer internet packages to low-wage families who need that type of help for remote learning? What do they offer in the sense of everyday survival as we work through the how cumbersome, if you will, the getting the vaccination is in phase 1.
Right. Because there's these events that are helpful, right? Like a stimulus check, or maybe if you decide to get vaccinated, but life is about day to day, like survival. And are the employers invested in sort of alleviating some of the fallout of COVID and people living life day to day and not just these sort of moments, these isolated events, like you said, you know? And I think that requires a shift in how we think about the relationship between employers and employees and what that relationship should look like.
Yep.
You know, should we expect it to be a relationship of care and investment and trust? I think you brought up a great point with trust and how many people have that kind of relationship with their employer about trust. Like when things go sideways, are you going to have my back?
Uh-huh.
You know, and I think that that's a fundamental question for us on our Jobs and Work podcast too, and I think that theme will kind of come through in a lot of different ways, trust.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's the culture of the organization, right? So I promise you that workers who already feel, to your question, who already feel that their companies, that their bosses, their direct bosses, their upper level bosses care about them, invest in them, want them to be healthy and well, will be more likely to, take this incentive, if not just for their health, but as a part of the culture of, this is a reciprocation. My employer invests in me, invests in my health, and so I'm going to take advantage of this incentive. Now, if this incentive package comes out of nowhere, this incentive, if they're making low wages and they don't feel like their bosses care if they come to work and they feel like they're replaceable, if their bosses and human resources aren't responding to their needs, and then all of a sudden there's a stipend and the hourly wage for a COVID vaccination, you're not going to get the buy-in because the culture of care and investment is not already there. And so it's, again, all of this is about a bigger question. It's not about an event. It's not about even COVID-19 necessarily. It's about how these huge retail markets who employ so many hourly workers build or have a culture where they feel, or build a culture where the workers feel as if, even though they're hourly workers, that they are cared about, they are invested in, and that their employers genuinely want them to be healthy for the common good, not just so that they can come to work the next day.
Right. And I think that's like the fundamental to be seen yet, right? In terms of what relationship do they have and what relationship are they interested in developing in the future. So anything else about the vaccine that you want to highlight here, Kendra, with the time that we have left?
No, I mean, not with the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccination just yet. I mean, this is a great start to a conversation. Yeah. I hope it's put a lot of ideas in management and leadership's mind. And, a lot of times they think about, oh, well, we should offer this great thing to our workers. And then they're just like, well, why won't they accept it? So, I hope this conversation helped them think about the bigger questions and investing a bit deeper. And if they need help with that, that's what we are here for. So Kris and I, I'm the president, Kris is the vice president of an organization called Work for Change. It's a consultancy. You can find us at work4changellc.com. And what we do is we work with organizations to tackle these, big questions of communication, of service, of employer relations. So check out our website, see what the services that we offer. Next week, we have our special guest who's going to talk more about different complications of work. So please, we're on all social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, you found us here on YouTube. So subscribe, like, share, and join us so we can make the world of work better.